Michael Jordan entered an upscale restaurant situated in the center of the city, dressed in casual, slightly wrinkled attire as if he had just come from an ordinary day. He opted for a small, discreet table, aiming to avoid drawing attention while the shimmering light from the crystal chandeliers brightened the area. However, before he could place an order, a waitress approached with a disdainful expression and an air of superiority. She sneered. "Are you sure you can afford to eat here?" Her sharp words, laced with implications, were loud enough for other diners to overhear. What transpired next not only left everyone in the restaurant speechless, but also unveiled a truth that altered everything. The prestigious restaurant, regarded as a symbol of elegance and refinement, was bustling that evening. Sleek sports cars were parked outside, and patrons entered, dressed in immaculate suits and flowing silk dresses. The glass doors reflected the light from the chandeliers, creating a surreal scene. The glass doors of Lumiere opened smoothly, and an imposing figure entered, capturing everyone's attention. Michael Jordan, the basketball icon with his commanding presence, walked through the restaurant at a slow and purposeful pace. Unlike the typical clientele of Lumiere, he wore a simple gray t-shirt, comfortable sweatpants, and a pair of worn sneakers. In a place where brands were indicators of status, his simplicity stood in stark contrast to the other guests. Near the entrance, a few individuals recognized Jordan, the legend who had dominated the NBA for years. Yet, amidst the restaurant's formal atmosphere, his appearance seemed out of place. Some whispered among themselves while the receptionist, Abigail, a young waitress, prepared to assist him. Abigail wore a pristine uniform and styled her hair in an elegant bun, with not a strand out of place. Her smile was professionally polite, but her eyes revealed a hint of arrogance. Having worked at Lumiere for several years, she took pride in her role at the most esteemed restaurant in Beverly Hills. However, her pride often led her to hastily judge others based on their appearance. When her gaze fell on Jordan, she couldn't conceal her disapproval. She quickly assessed his athletic outfit, raised an eyebrow critically, and thought to herself, "Someone like him doesn't belong here." Though she was merely a waitress, Abigail often viewed herself as a guardian of Lumiere's elegance. In her mind, guests needed to exhibit sophistication in every detail, from their attire to their behavior. The man before her, she doubted, could afford a meal here, let alone fit into the refined atmosphere. Jordan, seemingly unaware of the judgmental stares, approached the reception. He smiled, and with his deep, calm voice said, "Good evening. I would like to reserve a table if one is available." Abigail hesitated briefly at the politeness in his tone, but quickly regained her air of superiority. With a condescending smile, she replied, "Good evening. This is a fine dining restaurant. Are you sure you want to dine here?" Jordan looked directly into her eyes, his smile unwavering. "Yes, I would like to try the cuisine here." Abigail rolled her eyes slightly but maintained her superficial professionalism. "All right, let me check the availability of tables. Please wait a moment." She turned around, but her thoughts raced. This guy won't last long here. Let's see how he reacts when he sees the prices on the menu. Jordan, who had already faced immense pressure on basketball courts, remained calm, observing the luxurious surroundings of Lumiere. The golden light from the chandeliers illuminated his face, reflecting a confident and serene expression. He didn't utter another word, but his calm demeanor only piqued curiosity around him. That night, Jordan entered a world of glamour, but he didn't belong to it. Rather, he was about to challenge the prejudices ingrained within this very world. Abigail returned with an air of barely concealed arrogance. She had worked at Lumiere long enough to feel like the ultimate authority on matters of class and sophistication within the restaurant. In her eyes, Jordan, with his simple attire and calm demeanor, was entirely out of place. "Are you sure you want to eat here? This is an exquisite restaurant," she insisted, her voice blending mockery and disdain. Her gaze lingered on Jordan's worn sneakers before moving up to his face. Jordan, already accustomed to judgmental looks and disdainful remarks, simply smiled. He met Abigail's gaze, his eyes firm and unwavering. "Yes, I would like to experience this." His voice was calm and polite, rendering the waitress's sarcasm irrelevant. But Abigail didn't relent, tilting her head, her lips curling into a half-smile, determined to make him uncomfortable. With exaggerated grace, almost theatrical, she turned and spoke over her shoulder. "Follow me. I'll find a suitable seat for you." Abigail led Jordan through the vibrant heart of the restaurant, where the tables were impeccably set under the warm glow of crystal chandeliers. The customers exuded sophistication, engaged in lively conversations. But she didn't stop at any of the prime spots. Instead, she continued walking, guiding him to the farthest corner of the restaurant, where the lighting was dimmer and the ambiance less refined. Stopping at a table near the kitchen, where the clatter of dishes and the aromas of food were more intense, Abigail turned with a forced smile. "This spot should match your style perfectly," she said, dropping the menu onto the table with a slight thud loud enough to attract glances. Jordan nodded, showing no reaction. He sat down, his steady smile and calm eyes suggesting that nothing around him could disturb his peace. Abigail, however, wanted to see him uncomfortable, embarrassed, or better yet, leave. But his indifference only irritated her more. Frustrated, she turned and walked away, but not far enough for the nearby tables not to hear, "I hope you enjoy this spot. Not everyone gets a prime seat." The nearby diners began to murmur among themselves. Some cast sympathetic glances toward Michael, while others watched with curiosity. A young woman, Lisa, shook her head and whispered to her dinner companion, "She's so rude. He didn't do anything to deserve that." Meanwhile, at one of the central tables under the soft glow of the restaurant, an older couple, Mr. and Mrs. Carter, observed the situation. Mr. Carter, a distinguished man with silver hair, took a sip of his wine and murmured to his wife, "He is remarkably composed." Most people would have reacted by now. At the reception, Abigail smiled, satisfied with what she thought was her solution to the problem. In her mind, Michael wouldn't last long here. Despite savoring her victory, an invisible unease began to spread through the restaurant. Though he said little, his presence left a distinct impression, not only due to his imposing nature, but also because of his unwavering calm and grace. That night, Lumiere was about to become more than just an upscale restaurant. It was about to serve as the stage for an unforgettable lesson. Abigail was a few steps from Michael's table, her eyes assessing the situation as if calculating her next move to solidify her imagined authority. Her previous actions, claiming a special seat and letting out subtle insinuations, seemed insufficient to satisfy her sense of superiority. Returning with a soft leather menu in hand, she deliberately approached Michael's table. Her slow steps drew the attention of nearby customers. Placing the menu in front of him, Abigail leaned slightly, adopting a mocking tone. "Would you like me to explain the prices?" she asked, her voice intentionally condescending. Her finger pointed to the corner of the menu where the restaurant's most luxurious dish was listed. The most expensive item here cost $350. She emphasized each word, her eyes fixed on Michael's face, searching for any trace of discomfort or hesitation. But Michael, firm as a rock against a gentle wave, remained unshaken. He simply looked up, his eyes carrying a slight hint of amusement. "I'll have the filet mignon rossini," he said, his tone calm as if ordering the simplest dish on the menu. Michael's response caused Abigail to hesitate briefly. She hadn't expected him to choose the most expensive dish so nonchalantly. Quickly recovering, she let out a mocking laugh loud enough to catch the attention of other customers. "Oh, really?" she replied, her voice sweet and syrupy yet laden with veiled contempt. "I hope you can appreciate it. This is not the kind of food everyone is accustomed to." Nearby diners started to notice. A young couple at a neighboring table whispered, "She's so rude. Why would she talk to a customer like that?" The man beside the woman shook his head. "She probably thinks he can't afford it." Abigail, seemingly indifferent to the subtle disapproval of some guests, remained at Michael's table, resting her hand on the edge while waiting for some reaction. But Michael just smiled. "Thanks for the suggestion. I'm looking forward to trying it," he said, his voice polite and steady, tinged with tranquility. Michael's composed response unsettled Abigail. In her mind, this tall man dressed in casual sportswear and worn sneakers couldn't possibly understand the true value of such a luxurious dish. But, unknowingly, her behavior and actions had already exposed her own small-mindedness and lack of professionalism. As she turned away, Abigail deliberately raised her voice, addressing a colleague nearby. "Filet mignon rossini? He probably doesn't even know what he's ordering." People like him usually pick expensive items just to look fancy, but wait until the bill comes. "I bet he'll leave immediately." Although seated, Michael felt the weight of all eyes on him. Some diners looked at him with sympathy, others with curiosity, but he showed no signs of embarrassment or discomfort. Instead, he calmly opened the menu, flipping through the other dishes with genuine interest, as if simply enjoying a culinary experience. From the service counter, Abigail continued to watch him. A flash of irritation crossed her face at her inability to unsettle him, but she also felt a distorted satisfaction, believing she had asserted her superiority over someone she considered out of place in the world of Lumiere. However, from a reserved table, Mr. Carter, a distinguished older gentleman, watched the scene closely. Turning to his wife, he murmured, "He's testing everyone's patience here. It's intriguing." The atmosphere in the restaurant grew quieter, but the tension was unmistakable, like a spark about to ignite. Michael, still calm and unshaken, seemed not only to be savoring the experience, but also preparing for something much bigger, something neither Abigail nor the restaurant could anticipate. Turning to the service counter, Abigail kept her mocking smile on her lips. She walked directly up to Jake, her colleague who was checking the reservation list. Leaning in, she whispered, "He'll leave as soon as he sees the bill. People like him only pretend to be fancy. Just look at what he ordered, the most expensive dish. He doesn't even seem to know what he's doing. I bet he won't even order dessert." Jake, a young man with a kind face, seemed a little uneasy. He briefly looked at Michael, who was still seated in the farthest corner, calm as a mountain amidst the curious gazes. His voice was low, just for Abigail to hear. "Maybe he's just here to enjoy the experience. Who knows? He might have his own reasons for being here." Abigail scoffed, shaking her head. "Reasons? Look at his clothes. Who comes to this restaurant wearing worn shoes if not to pretend?" Jake avoided her gaze, not wanting to argue. He felt uncomfortable with her behavior, but knew that any opposition would only fuel her arrogance. At the corner table, Michael Jordan sat quietly, completely unconcerned with the murmurs behind him. He slowly turned the menu, as if savoring every moment in the luxurious setting. Curious glances occasionally came from nearby tables, but Jordan met them with a gentle and unruffled smile. At a neighboring table, an older couple, Mr. and Mrs. Carter, watched everything in silence. Mr. Carter, a distinguished man with silver hair, slowly lifted his wineglass. His eyes gleamed with understanding, as though he had witnessed countless similar stories. Slightly raising his glass, he gave a subtle nod to Jordan, a small but meaningful gesture. Jordan caught his gaze and returned the nod with a smile, his eyes conveying, "I'm fine, thank you." Mrs. Carter leaned closer to her husband and whispered, "It's strange how they're treating someone like that. Who do you think he is?" Mr. Carter placed his glass down, his eyes still fixed on Jordan. "There's something special about him, that calm. Not everyone has that." Across the room, Abigail continued her remarks with Jake. But this time she wasn't keeping her voice low. It was loud enough for some nearby customers to hear. "Look, he didn't even have a reservation. People like him just want to see if they can sneak by unnoticed. But I guarantee he'll run out the moment he sees the total on the bill." Some customers at nearby tables looked at Abigail, their disapproval beginning to show on their faces. In another corner, Lisa, a young businesswoman dining with a friend, furrowed her brow slightly. She turned to her companion. "She's being so rude. He hasn't done anything to deserve that." Her companion, a serene young man, nodded. "It seems like his very existence bothers her." The atmosphere in the restaurant began to shift, but not in the peaceful way Lumiere was known for. Abigail's words, the silence of the other diners, and Jordan's unshakable calm created an underlying tension. While Jordan continued to enjoy his moment, he refused to let the whispers affect his mood. Although he knew he was being judged, he didn't feel the need to justify himself. At the Carter's table, Mr. Carter sighed softly, his gaze still fixed on Jordan. "The world is a strange place," he said, his voice warm but tinged with disappointment. "People forget that someone's true value isn't in their appearance." Mrs. Carter nodded in agreement, but both of them understood that the drama of the night was far from over. Abigail may have thought she was in control of the situation, but it was clear that in that room the mere presence of Jordan commanded the atmosphere. After hearing the rumors, Abigail decided to take her pride to a whole new level. In her mind, Jordan didn't deserve the courteous service Lumiere was known for, at least not from her. Turning her back on him, She grabbed her notepad and began attending to other tables, as if Jordan didn't exist. She stopped at a central table where a wealthy couple was drinking red wine. Flashing a radiant smile and using her sweetest voice, she leaned in slightly. "Would you like another bottle of Margaux 2015? It pairs perfectly with the main course." The couple nodded, and Abigail quickly wrote down the order, throwing in some playful remarks to extend the conversation, but her eyes kept darting toward Jordan's table, where he sat calmly, seemingly oblivious to her deliberate attitude. Abigail passed by his table repeatedly, balancing a tray in one hand while focusing on another table. She acted as though she hadn't even noticed Jordan. The constant sound of her heels on the wooden floor echoed through the room. Jordan, a man who had faced fierce competitors on the basketball court, remained completely composed, his large hands resting lightly on the table, his eyes wandering across the room with an air of silent curiosity. A small jazz band played in the farthest corner of the restaurant, their gentle melodies filling the space with a soothing sound. When the music ended, Jordan clapped with a warm, resonant sound, bringing smiles to the faces of the band members. His applause not only caught the musicians' attention, but also stirred the curiosity of nearby customers. Some began to wonder how he remained so calm, even when it was clear he was being treated unfairly. At the service counter, Abigail frowned. The polite smile she wore for other customers vanished. Jordan's composure irritated her far more than she had anticipated. Inside, she began to suspect he was deliberately challenging her. Why doesn't he say anything? No complaints? No demands for better service? She bit her lip in frustration. Determined to further test Jordan's patience, she decided to delay the service. She approached another table, where a group of diners had just arrived, and began an excessively detailed explanation of the menu, fully aware that this would prolong Jordan's wait. At the Carter table, Mrs. Carter leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Do you see what she's doing? She's obviously making it harder for him. He's been waiting for at least 20 minutes." Mr. Carter sipped his wine, his sharp eyes fixed on Abigail. "I see, but what's intriguing is that he doesn't seem bothered. He's waiting, but not for the food. I think he's waiting for something else." Jordan remained seated, occasionally glancing at the paintings on the walls or the sparkling chandelier above. His unwavering calm not only heightened Abigail's frustration, but also highlighted the pettiness in her behavior. As she passed by Jordan's table again, Abigail deliberately turned her back on him and spoke loudly enough for a colleague to hear. "Sometimes I think some people don't understand that not everyone belongs here. It's funny to see how they try to fit in." Although her words weren't directly aimed at him, the target was clear. Some diners began whispering to one another, some visibly disapproving but lacking the courage to intervene. At another table, Lisa, who had been observing the whole situation, couldn't hide her anger. Setting her glass of wine down on the table, she said to her friend, "She's horrible. I don't understand why this restaurant keeps someone like her on staff." Her friend nodded thoughtfully. "But look at him. He doesn't need anyone to defend him. He knows exactly what he's doing." The prolonged wait had turned into a tense performance, with Jordan's calmness and confidence making him the undeniable lead actor. But it was his composure that exposed Abigail's lack of professionalism and pettiness, a realization she had yet to come to. The atmosphere inside Lumiere was growing increasingly tense, not because of any loud commotion, but due to the unusual silence surrounding Michael Jordan. He remained seated at a corner table near the kitchen, his behavior calm as Abigail continued to blatantly ignore him. Her unprofessional conduct and rude attitude were no longer a secret, drawing the attention of many diners. At the central table, Mr. Carter leaned forward slightly, his voice low but laden with indignation. "She's incredibly rude," he commented, his eyes fixed on Abigail, who was laughing and chatting with another group of customers. Mrs. Carter, who had been observing everything from the start, subtly nodded her head, her face showing clear discontent. "I've never seen a staff member behave like this. She's clearly trying to humiliate him. We should report her to the manager." Mr. Carter set his wineglass down on the table, his expression composed yet resolute. "I agree. Someone like her shouldn't be working in a place like this. But let's wait and see how this unfolds." In another corner of the restaurant, Lisa, a young businesswoman with well-groomed hair, could no longer stay silent. She shook her head, her eyes full of disapproval as she watched Abigail. Lisa had noticed the unfair treatment from the moment Michael Jordan walked in, and Abigail's actions only fueled her indignation. "She's awful," Lisa said to her companion, a man who was closely following the situation. "I can't believe a high-end restaurant tolerates this kind of behavior." The man frowned thoughtfully. "Maybe because he hasn't said anything, they think they can ignore him, but I have a feeling he's waiting for the right moment." Lisa tilted her head with curiosity, her gaze returning to Michael Jordan, who remained sitting upright, his face serene. "He seems so confident, but I hope the manager steps in soon. Letting this happen is so unfair." At a nearby table, Mrs. Hamilton sat silently with her granddaughter, watching the entire scene. She took a sip of her tea and gently set the cup down. "This is shameful," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Staff are here to serve, not to judge the customers. That young woman needs to learn a lesson." Her granddaughter, with bright eyes, leaned forward. "Do you think he's going to do something?" "He's just sitting there, not saying a word." "His silence is the answer," Mrs. Hamilton replied in a calm tone. "People who truly know their worth don't need to prove it to anyone. He knows who he is, and that girl is going to ruin herself soon." Meanwhile, Abigail, oblivious to the latent discontent spreading through the dining room, remained focused on her personal agenda. She spent extra time at the central tables, deliberately engaging in long conversations to divert attention away from what she believed to be a spotlight on Michael Jordan. Passing by his table once again, she didn't even look in his direction, but spoke loudly enough to be heard while talking to a colleague. "That's why we need higher standards. Not everyone understands the sophistication required here, and clearly not everyone belongs." Michael Jordan's steady gaze landed briefly on Abigail without a word. He didn't need to respond. There was no need to react to someone so determined to dig her own hole. Instead, he offered a discreet smile and continued watching the room, where other diners had started murmuring to one another. At the central table, Mr. Carter turned to Mrs. Carter. "We need to talk to the manager immediately. This isn't just unfair, it's ruining the experience for everyone." Mrs. Carter nodded, her eyes reflecting empathy for Michael Jordan. "I hope he doesn't leave before this is resolved. He deserves respect." The silent tension in Lumiere was no longer the hallmark of an upscale restaurant. It had become a rope stretched to the breaking point, waiting for a single spark to ignite a full confrontation. Abigail, smug in her actions, remained blissfully unaware that the very customers she thought were neglecting the injustice were, in fact, gathering in support of Michael Jordan, and they were no longer willing to stay silent. After several rounds serving other tables and deliberately ignoring Michael Jordan, Abigail finally walked toward the table where he was seated. In her hands, a silver tray held the Rossini filet mignon he had ordered, a signature dish of the restaurant priced at $350. Abigail moved slowly, her heels clicking against the wooden floor, intentionally drawing the attention of the diners. Her eyes betrayed an air of arrogance, and her step declared that this was nothing more than a service delivered reluctantly. As she approached the table, Abigail stopped for a moment and placed the plate on the table with just a bit more force than necessary. The slight clink of the plate meeting the table reverberated in the air. Her smile was cold and defiant. "Here's what you ordered. I hope you can enjoy it." Michael Jordan, as always, maintained his polite and composed demeanor. He looked at the elegantly presented dish in front of him and then at Abigail. "It looks delicious. Thank you," he said in a warm and courteous tone, as if he hadn't noticed the challenge in her words. Not content to let the moment end there, Abigail leaned slightly forward in a gesture that mixed false cordiality with intimidation. Her voice was low but clear enough for him to hear, tinged with a subtle acid. "This dish is for connoisseurs. I think it's your first time, isn't it?" Michael Jordan raised his eyes to her without a trace of anger or irritation. He smiled faintly and nodded. "Thanks for the advice." Michael Jordan's calm reaction not only disconcerted Abigail but also made the onlookers feel secondhand embarrassment for her. Instead of humiliating Michael Jordan, she inadvertently exposed her own pettiness. Lisa, at a nearby table, could no longer hold back. She leaned toward her friend, her voice brimming with indignation. "He just thanked her politely, and she's still being sarcastic. Unbelievable." Her friend nodded, his eyes fixed on Michael Jordan's table. "She's trying to provoke him, but I think she picked the wrong target." At the central table, Mr. And Mrs. Carter continued to observe the scene with serious expressions. Mr. Carter raised his wineglass but did not drink, his eyes following every move of Abigail. "She has no idea who she's dealing with," he said in a low but firm tone. "A man like that doesn't need to say or do anything. She will end up embarrassing herself." Unaware of the judgment from others, Abigail saw the diner straighten up once again. She examined Michael Jordan once more, as if searching for a sign of discomfort or annoyance, but found nothing. The feeling of defeat crept over her, and to mask it, she threw out another arrogant remark. "If this doesn't suit your taste, we always have simpler options. Feel free to order if necessary." Michael Jordan kept his smile steady and nodded slightly. "Thank you. I'll consider it." His composure was almost irritating. Abigail gripped the notebook tightly in her hands and spun on her heels, walking away without looking back. At the counter, she slammed the silver tray, startling Jake, her colleague. "He's just pretending to be polite," she hissed, her voice filled with frustration. "I'm sure he doesn't even know what he just ordered. People like that only come here to get attention." Jake looked at her with clear disapproval. "Maybe he just wants a peaceful dinner." "Isn't it our job to serve everyone?" he asked. Abigail rolled her eyes, full of disdain. "Don't you see, Jake? He doesn't belong here. I bet he'll leave as soon as he sees the bill." Meanwhile, Michael Jordan began to savor his filet mignon Rossini. The tender slices of meat combined with foie gras and truffle sauce were a masterpiece both in taste and presentation. He chewed slowly, taking his time, his expression serene. Around him, the murmurs of the other diners grew louder. Some expressed indignation on his behalf, while others simply looked at Abigail with disapproval. No one spoke aloud, but the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted from formal elegance to an unsettling tension. Sitting in the most discreet corner, Michael Jordan had become the center of attention. But he did nothing but calmly eat his meal as if orchestrating the entire scene. Abigail had no idea that her actions were leading her to a lesson she would never forget. Still with an arrogant smile on her lips, she thought she had everything under control. She believed her delays and cutting remarks would eventually force Michael Jordan to leave the restaurant in silence and humiliation. What she didn't expect was how drastically the atmosphere would change. The restaurant manager, Mr. Thompson, emerged from the reception. He was a middle-aged man with an imposing appearance. He walked quickly to Michael Jordan's table, his face marked by visible concern. His presence immediately drew the attention of the nearby patrons, who began looking curiously at the discreet corner of the restaurant. When he reached the table, he gave a slight bow. His voice, low and full of respect, echoed through the hall. "Michael Jordan, it is an honor to have you here. I apologize for the delay. I had no idea you would be coming today." His words were like thunder breaking the balance of the room. The ambient murmur ceased abruptly, leaving a stunned silence. The nearby patrons widened their eyes in disbelief. Michael Jordan, still calm and composed, placed his knife and fork on the table and looked at Mr. Thompson. He smiled warmly and responded with his soft, kind voice. "No problem. I just wanted to enjoy a quiet dinner." Across the room, Abigail froze, still holding the tray in her hand. Her vacant eyes were fixed on the interaction between Mr. Thompson and Michael Jordan. The words reverberated in her mind, shattering her confidence. Michael Jordan? Did he just call him Michael Jordan? The thought spun in her head, her mind refusing to accept the reality. She looked around and noticed that everyone in the restaurant was now focused on Michael Jordan, and, to her horror, on her as well. A young couple sitting nearby whispered loud enough for Abigail to hear, "That's Michael Jordan, the basketball legend. He's involved in many business ventures." Another added, "And he's a renowned philanthropist. How did the staff here not recognize him?" The whispers spread throughout the restaurant like ripples in a pond. Faces that once showed curiosity now displayed admiration and astonishment. Some diners turned to look directly at Abigail, their expressions heavy with silent judgment. Her heart raced. Panic and shame washed over her in waves. She froze in place, unable to move forward or backward. Her face paled. Her trembling hands gripped the edge of the tray as if trying to hold on to the last remnants of her composure. Thompson turned and cast a quick glance toward Abigail, His eyes were sharp and steady, clearly feeling the discomfort in the atmosphere. The diners, still seated, picked up their glasses of water and looked directly at her. Mr. Thompson's gaze was not angry but penetrating and dominant, making her want to disappear. She knew without a doubt that her behavior had been exposed. The tension in the room intensified. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, sitting at the central table, exchanged a look of astonishment and satisfaction. Mr. Carter murmured, "I knew he didn't need to say a word. His presence alone speaks for him." Lisa, sitting at a nearby table, shook her head in disappointment as she looked at Abigail. She ruined herself. A waitress who doesn't respect her guests has no place here. Michael Jordan placed his glass of water on the table and softly spoke to Mr. Thompson. "You don't need to worry. It's fine. But perhaps I would like to have a brief conversation with your staff after dinner." Mr. Thompson immediately nodded, shifting from concern to resolute. "Of course. I'll arrange that right away." Abigail felt as though the ground beneath her feet was crumbling. Michael Jordan's words, though gentle, carried an undeniable weight. All eyes were on her. Every gaze was a silent condemnation. What she had imagined would be a lesson for a humble, undesirable guest became the deepest lesson of her own life. She knew that that night she had not only lost the trust of everyone, but possibly her job at that prestigious restaurant. She stood frozen, feeling as if the air had disappeared from the room. The murmurs around her and the heavy silence from Michael Jordan left her uncertain of what to do. She felt engulfed by fear, but there was no escape from the situation she had created for herself. Michael Jordan looked directly at Abigail. His eyes carried no anger, but the severity within them was enough to make her feel exposed. He leaned slightly forward and, with a deep, firm voice full of calm authority, asked, "Miss Abigail, how do you think customers should be treated?" Abigail opened her mouth, but no words came out. She stammered as if the sentences were lost in her mind. I didn't know who you were." Michael Jordan slightly shook his head. His brows furrowed. His voice sounded clear and sharp. "You don't need to know who I am to show me respect. Every person who walks through these doors deserves to be treated with dignity." His words echoed throughout the restaurant, awakening clarity not only in Abigail but in everyone around her. It was clear that Michael's words were meant for everyone. Abigail felt her legs grow unstable. She tried to respond, but each word seemed stuck in her throat. Finally, she whispered, her voice so soft it was almost inaudible. "But you're not like the other customers." Michael leaned back in his chair, his gaze remaining firm but not overly harsh. He spoke slowly, letting each word sink into Abigail's mind. "It's precisely because I'm not like the other customers that you need to learn to treat everyone with the same respect. It's not something you reserve for people based on how they dress, how they speak, or how they look. It's the most basic thing every person deserves." Abigail lowered her head, her hands gripping the edge of the tray so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She couldn't respond. She couldn't justify herself. Every action, every word she had said earlier in the evening replayed in her memory, now haunting her. From the central table, Mr. Carter gave a subtle nod and whispered to his wife, saying that Michael didn't need to raise his voice or assert his authority. What he said and how he said it was enough to teach that girl a lesson. Lisa, sitting nearby, raised her glass of wine but did not drink. Her gaze rested on Abigail, her disciplining expression easy to read. "She'll probably remember this lesson for the rest of her life. I just hope she really changes." Thompson, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally stepped forward. His voice was firm but not cruel. "Abigail, I think we need to have a conversation after your shift. But first, let me handle this situation." Abigail did not respond, merely nodding weakly, her eyes avoiding everyone's gaze. She took a step back, trying to hide her flushed face from shame and fear. Michael watched her retreat for a moment before turning to Mr. Thompson. His tone softened when he said, "There's no need to make this a bigger problem than it is. I believe everyone can learn from their mistakes as long as they're willing to change." His words were not meant only for Abigail but resonated throughout the restaurant. Some patrons lowered their heads in reflection, while others nodded in agreement, recognizing the truth in what he said. Michael picked up his knife and fork and resumed his meal with an air of calm, as if nothing had happened. But everyone in the restaurant knew that this calm was not indifference. It was a lesson delivered with weight and meaning. From a distance, Abigail could feel everyone's eyes still on her. Her actions that night would not fade into the background of her work, but would become a turning point in how she saw people and the responsibilities she carried. Michael put down his knife and fork, gently wiped his mouth with a napkin, and slowly stood up. Throughout the room, it felt as though time had frozen. All eyes, from the diners sitting at tables to the servers nearby, turned toward him. No one dared speak. The silence was only broken by faint murmurs in the distance and the soft clinking of wine glasses. Michael's gaze swept the room. His face was calm, but his penetrating eyes radiated confidence and serenity. When he finally spoke, his deep and resonant voice carried a weight that seemed to vibrate in the very air. This is what this restaurant was founded for, to welcome everyone, no matter how they look or where they come from. This is the philosophy the founders, myself included, have always believed in. He paused, his eyes moving from one face to another, ensuring his words landed with full impact. Then he continued. Unfortunately, today we failed to uphold that belief. The words sounded like a gong, awakening a collective sense of responsibility. The tension in the room thickened. Some diners lowered their heads, avoiding Michael's gaze with guilt etched on their faces for staying silent and doing nothing. Some nodded subtly in agreement, though their embarrassment was unmistakable. From the center table, Mr. Carter gently set down his wineglass and shook his head. It's shameful that he's right. We let this happen without saying a word. Lisa, seated at a nearby table, leaned forward, her eyes full of admiration. He's not just addressing the team, he's speaking to all of us. Michael pressed his voice firmly but imbued with deep sincerity. The world we live in is full of prejudice. We judge people by how they look, the clothes they wear, the way they speak, or what we assume they have or don't have. But I believe places like Lumiere should be different. This is not just a place for the rich or powerful. It's a place where everyone should feel welcome. He paused again, his eyes settling on Abigail, not with accusation, but with an encouraging look. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them. Abigail, still standing in the farthest corner, lowered her head. Michael's words were like a spotlight illuminating the missteps she had made that night. She knew there was no excuse that could adequately explain her actions. And the weight of every gaze on her was a constant silence, a reminder of her responsibility. Michael turned to address the entire staff. His tone softened, but his determination was unshaken. Lumiere is not just a restaurant. It's a place where we build relationships not based on wealth or appearance, but on respect and understanding. If any of you forget that, we fail not only ourselves, we fail the customers who trust us to be better. Some of the staff hung their heads, shame evident on their faces. Jake, who had silently witnessed everything, nodded slightly, his eyes reflecting a newfound respect for Michael. Michael's gaze shifted to the diners, and his voice grew stronger. This is not just about the team, it's about all of us. We all have the responsibility to create a better space. When you see someone being treated unfairly, you have the right, and I believe the responsibility, to speak. Silence is sometimes complicity. His words rippled through the room, touching every heart. Some diners bowed their heads, ashamed to have chosen silence in the face of what had happened. Others looked at Michael with a newly discovered admiration, and, unable to contain herself, Lisa began clapping softly. The applause was like a spark, and within seconds the entire room joined in. Mr. Carter nodded in agreement and joined in the applause, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. Michael raised his hand gently, signaling for silence. He turned to Mr. Thompson, who was nearby with an expression of concern and gratitude. I believe we can do better, Michael said, his voice now calm but still resolute. I'd like to meet with the whole team after we close tonight. It's time for change. Mr. Thompson nodded, his voice full of respect. Of course, Michael. I'm sorry for what happened tonight. We'll make it right. Michael sat down again and resumed his meal, as if the powerful speech that had left the entire restaurant in thoughtful silence was just another routine, but it was clear that no one in the room would forget the lesson he had just delivered. In the corner, Abigail felt the weight of shame pressing on her, but beneath the embarrassment, a new determination began to take root. She decided to change, to become better, not only for the job but for herself. When the last diners left the Lumiere restaurant, the place sank into a rare silence. The staff gathered in the main space, forming a circle around Michael, who stood at the center with a calm yet commanding presence. The chandelier light above reflected on his face, highlighting the seriousness and sincerity in his gaze. Michael surveyed the group, his eyes moving from Mr. Thompson to the restaurant manager and each staff member, including Abigail, who stood at the edge of the circle, her head bowed as though trying to avoid his gaze. His voice was deep and firm, and each word carried weight. Everyone makes mistakes, but what matters is what we learn from them. Mistakes don't define us, but how we correct them does. He paused, letting his words sink in. Some staff members nodded, acknowledging that his words were meant not only for Abigail but for everyone on the team. Michael continued, his eyes sweeping the room. This restaurant is not just a place to eat. It's a space where people come to experience something special, to feel valued. Our responsibility is to ensure that anyone who walks through these doors feels welcome, regardless of how they dress, how they speak, or how much money they have in their wallets. Abigail, standing at the end of the circle, felt as though his words struck directly at her heart. Her eyes began to shine, and she bit her lip, struggling not to break, but she knew she couldn't avoid it forever. Michael stopped speaking, his gaze finally settling on Abigail. There was no anger, no disdain, just severity tempered with confidence. Abigail, he called her name. His voice was soft, but still firm. Today was a difficult day, not just for you, but for everyone here. And I want to hear from you what you think we should do to ensure this doesn't happen again. Abigail looked up, her eyes red and tearful. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room waiting for her response. Her voice trembled as she spoke. I'm sorry, Michael. I was wrong. I let my own prejudices blind me and failed in my responsibilities. I truly regret it. She took another deep breath, tears streaming down her cheeks. I didn't realize that respect isn't about someone's appearance. I understand that now, and I promise I will change. Michael nodded slightly, his eyes reflecting a mix of kindness and encouragement. Change is for you, Abigail, not for me or anyone else. Change is a process, and I believe you can do it if you really want to. These words were not just for Abigail. They resonated with everyone in the room. Some staff members nodded subtly, as if recognizing that they too needed to rethink their perspectives and actions. Michael took a step toward the center of the circle, his voice dropping lower but growing even more resolute. This restaurant is not defined by fancy tables or expensive dishes. It is defined by the people, by the way we treat each other and our guests. And if we don't do that with respect and compassion, nothing else matters. The room fell silent, with only the soft sound of breathing filling the space. Next to Mr. Thompson, Michael spoke, his voice full of gratitude. Mr. Thompson, thank you for your words. We'll make sure our team doesn't just learn from this mistake, but actually changes so that Lumiere becomes a place where everyone feels welcome. Michael nodded, a slight hint of relief in his eyes. He looked around the room one last time before concluding, Now is the time to start again, stronger and better. I believe in you all. You can all do this. Abigail wiped away her tears, feeling as though a heavy burden had been lifted, but also as if she had been given a new opportunity to do things right. In Michael's gaze, she saw no resentment, only a glimpse of hope, and that made her even more determined to change. That night, when everyone left the restaurant, not just Abigail, but the entire Lumiere team, understood that this wasn't just a lesson for their work. It was a profound lesson about how to be better human beings. The glass door of Lumiere closed softly behind Michael, leaving the elegant space behind as the lights dimmed. The glow of the Beverly Hills streetlights illuminated his imposing figure, highlighting every deliberate and graceful step he took on the sidewalk. The quiet of the early morning enveloped the surroundings, broken only by the soft rustling of the trees and the distant hum of passing cars. Michael walked slowly, his eyes fixed on the street ahead while his mind lingered on the events that had just unfolded. He thought about the restaurant, about Abigail, about the team, and about the diners who had witnessed that moment that night. It wasn't just a lesson for one person, it was a lesson for everyone, including himself. He took a deep breath, his lips curving into a slight smile. A thought echoed in his mind, powerful and clear, just like the words he had spoken in the meeting earlier. The world needs more kindness. True strength isn't in judgment, but in acceptance. It's the small daily choices that define who we are. Michael knew that the lesson of that night wasn't just about how to handle customers. It was about how we perceive each other. Beyond prejudices, beyond appearances, to see the true value in people. He thought about Abigail, who made a mistake but showed genuine remorse and a commitment to change. To him, that was far more meaningful than any reprimand or punishment could be. Memories of his time on the basketball court returned to his mind. He remembered how he faced criticism and snapped judgments from people simply because of his playing style. He remembered how patience and calm helped him overcome it all. And that night, he saw a similar moment. Not on a court, but in a restaurant. As Michael turned a corner, the glow of a neon sign reflected on his face, accentuating his confident and composed demeanor. He knew that his actions that night weren't to show power or prove anything. They were about planting a seed for change, a change not just within Lumiere but in how people treat one another in the wider world. He stopped for a moment and turned to look back at Lumiere, now barely illuminated by its windows. He hoped the events wouldn't fade into obscurity, but remain as a lasting lesson for Abigail, for the staff, and for the customers who witnessed the kindness. Michael believed that it wasn't about grand gestures, but about small, consistent choices made every day. When you choose to treat someone well, you not only change them, you change yourself. He continued walking, leaving behind the shimmering lights of Beverly Hills. The road ahead stretched infinitely, just like the message he conveyed that night. A path that leads to a world where respect and compassion aren't luxuries but norms. Lumiere was no longer just a restaurant. It had become a symbol of change, hope, and the power of healing through the smallest acts of kindness. The story of Lumiere was not just about a dinner. It was a profound lesson in respect and compassion, two values that should never be limited by appearances or status. Michael showed us that sometimes calm and kindness can be the most powerful tools to challenge and change what seems unchangeable. If you liked this video, leave a like, subscribe, and help us bring you more exciting stories involving celebrities. Here you will be updated every day on the world of celebrities. See you soon.